First of all, thank you so much for everyone to be here. As Arisa said, today we are doing this external webinar under the aWISH project as one of the members of the consortium. We are talking about increasing the impact of science in EU politics and the EFSA guidelines. And today you will have, there you go. You'll have me, the program leader for farm animals at Eurogroup for animals, and also my colleague Marta Klimczak, the program officer for farm animals at Eurogroup. The reason why we decided to build this webinar, it was because a long time ago, it sounds like more like a past life, I was a researcher under a EU-funded project. And back then, no one actually stopped me and said, look, this is how the EU works. And this is how, when you're thinking about your papers and meeting your deadlines and your goals and KPIs for the grants, you can turn your research more impactful. So this kind of was buried in my mind for a long time. Then I moved to Eurogroup 4 years ago. And then we were lucky to be part of the aWISH project. And the conversations brought me back to this time. But now the difference is I know how the EU works now. So I could make an impact and bring more of this to any other researcher that it was in the same place as I was some years ago, thinking about their research, thinking about the structure, what to prioritize, because at a certain point, as you all know, we try to do as much research as we can, and how to bring it back to the politicians. Because of course, all of you are thinking about impact, and I also want to think that my research back then on animal welfare indicators was impactful. But if you convince policymakers to also take your research on board, then you can maximize the impact of your research 1,000, if not 1,000,000 times more, given the number of animals that exist in the EU. Of course, you will hear that our focus is a lot on animal welfare and farm animals, but that doesn't mean this is not applicable to other areas, even outside the animal research. So in order for you also to assess a little bit whether this webinar was useful for you, we selected 3 main objectives for the entire webinar. So the first one is that you leave here with a better understanding of the EU. I'm not going to lie to you that it's not going to be top line. Of course it's going to be, because there are entire degrees just for people to understand how the EU works. But we summed it down a little bit to the most important things to know if you are a researcher in this environment. Then the second thing is with this basis of understanding, we're giving you some initial ideas of how to raise the impact of your research. There are a lot of them. So the idea is to really start sparking this part of increasing the impact of your research in your minds. But then hopefully with the tools, with the initial ideas and how the EU works, you'll be able to then maximize the learnings of this webinar. And finally, my colleague Marta is going to give you a deeper knowledge on the new engagement process of EFSA. The reason why we decided to include this final part to this workshop is because we thought, okay, we'll give you more general top line overviews and tips, but then it would be nice also to leave here with something already concrete to look at and to engage with and so on. So that's where Marta will give you a more kind of concrete, more in-depth knowledge of that tool. So hopefully we'll leave here understanding it much better. So how are we going to organize this? I'll give you a very small, quick introduction about Eurogroup for Animals, so you don't wonder why are these people trying to teach me how the EU works. Then I will go into how the EU works and how to increase the research impact. And then Marta will bring the second part of the webinar about the new EFSA process on engagement. And then hopefully we'll have time for questions and answers. And I hope that we actually have a little bit more time to do that. Who is Eurogroup? So we are a pan-European organization of NGOs around animal welfare. We are the biggest coordinated group at regional level looking at animal welfare, and our vision is a Europe that values and respects animals as sentient beings. In a very summarized and probably simple way, what we do is we bring the voice of the animal welfare organizations to the Brussels bubble, to the politicians. So to a certain extent, we increase the impact of the work that our members do towards the EU. And that's where also a lot of our learnings come from to this webinar. We are, at the moment, we have 98 member organizations across 26 EU member states. We are missing Cyprus. So if anyone out there is from Cyprus and knows a good animal welfare NGO, please do reach out. But we also have other countries that are countries that have NGOs that are members, because we also work in things such as international trade. Our work areas, so here, as I said, you're going to hear more about farm animals, but we also work across other species and uses of animals, like animals in science or companion animals, wildlife, and other specific topics like food systems transformation, or in this a bigger topic now, it's the transport of live animals. So how does the EU work? So the EU has a lot of institutions, bodies, agencies around them. I'm sure a lot of you have contacted in different capacity to these different bodies, but I'm going to bring you more here today, some detail about three main institutions in the EU that are the main drivers behind writing new legislation, where a lot of your research is at several levels and in different occasions. So we'll talk about the European Commission, the Council of the EU, and the European Parliament. So the European Commission is the institution that proposes the legislation. So this is where I would say the majority of your research is used, because this is usually technical people, the civil servants that are writing the legislation, that are trying to understand more and get more expertise on topics and so on. And this is the institution that is responsible for writing the legislation and proposing it. Then we have what we probably, I hope all of you have heard in the last weeks, and some of you have voted today, and some of you will vote during the weekend. We have the European Parliament. And this is the people that we, as EU citizens, elect to bring our voice to the legislation making process. They don't write legislation themselves, but they have to provide amendments, approve legislation that the Commission produces. And of course, the EU is also made by member states, by the countries, and these also have to be represented. And how are they represented? They are represented at the Council, and the Council is created or is formed by ministers, presidents of the different member states. And in the case of animal topics, they are usually debated on what it's called the Agriculture and Fisheries Council, that is made by the ministers around those subjects in the countries, which may vary because, as you know, some of your countries may have an agriculture minister that does agriculture, fisheries, and animal welfare. Other countries may have just one minister for each of the areas. And for example, now there is a cat and dog legislation that is being looked at by the Council. And here I can give you the example of my country, Portugal. The Council has two ministries that are responsible for this. So the Agriculture Minister, but also the Environmental Minister. And it's the same for other countries, as I could understand. So this council is also responsible to vote and to look at the draft proposals that the Commission produces. So in a nutshell, and I stole this from the European Open Days that we had here on the 1st of May from the Berlaymont. Some lovely, nice lady had this scheme, and I was like, this is perfect for me to explain how the EU works. So I stole it, but I asked her if I could, and she said yes. So we have the European Commission drafting a new EU proposal, a new proposal for EU law. Then in their separate capacities, the European Parliament, so the people that we elect, and the Council, which are our ministers, discuss and propose amendments and eventually all agree with the final draft. And then they have to, these two bodies, with the European Commission helping, they have to agree on a final proposal. And then when these three bodies agree, which we call the trialogue, so when this trialogue comes to a fruition result, so they agree, then we have a new EU law. During this process, there are a lot of things. I would love to, but I can't in 20 minutes go into a lot of detail. But during this process that your research is used. You will see that I will zoom in mainly on the European Commission because that's where kind of the main research is used. But I can tell you that all these three bodies use research to different capacities. So how can you engage as a researcher? There are more ways, and I've put on this slide, but these were kind of the main ones that I thought it was worth us going to a little bit more detail today. So the first one, of course, you apply to EU funding. A lot of you are here today because you probably have the funding coming from the EU. Then you can also adapt your research. So there are a couple of criteria that I will list. There are more, but there are a couple of criteria that you can list that you can keep in mind whilst you are writing your research proposals and structuring your trials and your research papers. Then you can interact with the democratic tools around the EU that require input from experts or input of expertise. You can also expose directly the policymakers to your research, and I will give you some examples of that. And then also you can get other stakeholders on board that are in the Brussels bubble. We call it the Brussels bubble, kind of this environment around the policymakers that will use your research, like us, for example, the Eurogroup for Animals. So in terms of applying for grants, you're all experts on this. You have probably entire teams in your in your institutions that are experts on this. So I'm not going to go into the detail of this. The only thing I'm going to say, which was, I have to say, not very obvious to me before when I was a researcher, and I still meet a lot of researchers that this is not obvious to them, is that the department, so the Directorate General that gives you the money for your grants, doesn't necessarily is the same department that is going to use your research on the legislative making. So for example, Horizon 20, it is kind of coordinated by the Agriculture Department, but is mainly mandated by the Research and Development and Education Department. So what I'm hearing, or what I'm trying to say is, just because you receive your funding, don't take it for granted that the Commission is going to use your research and is aware that your research exists. So always make sure that at certain points in the plan of the grant, in the plan of your research, you have a contact point with the department or the Directorate General that is supposed to use your research. For example, aWISH, we have funding that came from the Research and Development Directorate General, but who is supposed to use our research is DG Sante, so the Health Directorate General. So we have to make sure that we directly engage with them through different tools that I'm going to go into next, to increase the visibility of our research to the people that actually have to use it. So this is the only thing I'm going to say on grants. Then it comes adapting your research. So when you are planning on the bigger plan, but also on specifically on a paper or on a trial, of course, we always have to think, okay, but this is going to take longer if I add this, or if I add that, or if I have to increase the dimension of my lit review, whatever. But the truth is sometimes, and you should always measure benefits, cost benefit of it, it is worth spending a little bit more time to try and reflect and increase your impact towards policymakers as well. And what's important for them, and you may have contacted with this also as well at different levels. First, of course, but this is not just for policymakers, concrete data on impact is always welcomed. So in terms of costs, numbers of animals, the externality costs and impact, the social impact of whatever you are proposing. This is more important also for policymakers because at certain points, and I will go into that, in some of the democratic tools and in some of the processes, research is only taken into account if it has that. So you can have a brilliant paper, but if it doesn't provide this characteristics that the policymakers need, they say this is great, but it's not applicable to what we want. So, discard. Then, of course, scalability and representative is key for the EU because the EU is big. So even if it's just 2 or 3 paragraphs in your introduction on a paper that say this research was done in Poland, but there is this in this paper, or there is this in this research also done in Portugal and Spain, which can compare to my research like this. And also think, if you have to prioritize, for example, I will give the example of aWISH, we have to prioritize indicators that we're going to look at. This criteria like scalability and representativity can help you prioritize which one to research. Then there is one point that is very key to policymakers that I've encountered this here in the EU, the Brussels bubble, but not so much in my previous jobs, which was the benefit to the main cost bearer. What this means is, for example, we are creating a tool to apply on farm that the that will benefit the environmental impact of a farm, for example. Okay, it will benefit the environment, but who is going to pay for that tool is a farmer. So one of the things that usually the Commission, when they are building legislation, they are challenged, because there are bodies that can challenge this legislative, the building of legislation. They were going to say, okay, I can see this benefits civil society, the environment, and so on, but what is the benefit for the person that is going to pay for this? So always keep this in mind when you're thinking about how to measure and how to show impact of your research. Then comparability of data is a massive challenge that especially the European Commission has, because there is no easy way to go about this, because of course, if you're building your research and if you're using a certain type of metrics, you're not going to try and adapt to someone else random that is doing the same research anywhere else. But at project level, so at aWISH, my previous project when I was working aWIN, there is, I don't know, a clear project, whatever, all the other projects, at project level, you can think about this between your work packages. How are we dealing with comparability of data of the different trials that we are doing? Because that's a massive challenge for the European Commission. So make sure that the metrics you are using in one trial is the same metrics that you're using in another trial, and so on. Like if you're measuring antibiotics, try and measuring all the same, for example, at least within your project, of course. Then usable tools for policy. So this is kind of, again, going back to that part of the reflection that when you're starting to think about your research, how can this be useful for policymakers, and debate this a little bit, do a brainstorm amongst your colleagues and your teams. And then the final thing I was going to say is keep an eye on the Brussels bubble. It's not easy if you're not here to kind of know exactly what's happening, and actually the easiest thing to do is to talk with someone that is here in the Brussels bubble, for example, your group for animals, but someone else as well. But it is always good to keep an eye on what EFSA is brewing, what the Commission, the work program, what the Commission says they are going to work on. Like there was a farm to fork strategy. They said they're going to revise the animal welfare legislation. What are they saying they're going to look at? Cages. Okay, so maybe we want to do something around that. You know, so keep at least a temperature of what's in the mind of the policymakers. Then the other point was about interacting with democratic tools. There are a lot of tools, and we've built this presentation with links, so we will share this the presentation so you can also go into more detail, because we don't have time now. But there are a lot of tools that you can use because of the different democratic procedures that are around the EU, where you can expose policymakers to your research and to your expertise as well. In terms, I will pick an example like the impact assessment. So impact assessment is a confidential process, but it has a lot of rules, and I've put the link so you can read about it. But the point of this impact assessment is that the Commission, every time they say they're going to build a legislation, they have to prove that the legislation is going to create the right impact. In order to do that, they do an impact assessment. This impact assessment is then handed over to consultancies that we're going to do interviews, lit reviews, and they are going to use a lot of your research on this. So if you understand them a little bit better, if you know a little bit better what they're supposed to use, then you can also have some hints of how to better tailor your research, but also who you have to expose your research to. And then as an expert, so you as a researcher, you can also interact with democratic tools like the Animal Welfare Platform of the European Commission, where every 2 years, there is the place is open and you can apply as an expert in this case, animal welfare, but there's also others, and in your own capacity as an independent expert. And also this platform has subgroups that you can also apply to. And there are I've put another example there that was just came out this week. For example, the Directorate General for Health, DG Santé, has now going to have a new animal welfare expert group. This group is the member states or the countries that dominate an expert for this group. So one way of doing this is be in contact with your official authorities and say, hey, I'm an expert in animal welfare, so you may want to consider me. Of course, this is more high-level engagement, but this is another example of how experts and expertise is sought by the European Commission. And then you can also expose policymakers directly to your research. So not you as an expert representing your knowledge in a platform, but also just literally, you just publish a paper, you have a project, and you want the policymakers to take that into account and learn about it. And here, of course, the first thing to do is have direct meetings. So you identify which director general will value or will use your research. In the case of animal welfare, it's usually DG Santé, which has an animal welfare unit. But also you can use the tools that I referred before just to go and present your research. So the animal welfare platform of the European Commission welcomes, if relevant and within the scope, research to be presented. For example, Eurogroup did a report on the business case for meat and carcasses trade, and because it was relevant for the time, we proposed ourselves to present, and we were accepted. Of course, it's not guaranteed, but you can. The only advice I'll give here is that you can look online. There are members of this platform. So if a member of a platform suggested you, it's probably easier to be accepted. But nevertheless, it's open for anyone to propose their research. There is also a mechanism, and I will add a link to this before we share the presentation. It's called civil dialogue groups. And this is a mechanism, again, for the Commission to contact with the different stakeholders. And here there is a lot of researchers coming and presenting as well their research, and you can auto-propose yourself or propose by a member of the civil dialogue group. Examples of what was presented here, for example, impact studies on the costs of high welfare farming, or topics around vaccines or animal avian influenza. And here the civil dialogue groups have different topics. So there's one on poultry, one on pigs, one on cows, and so on. And then also within the platform, there are expert subgroups. I'm not going to go into detail because this, the EU is like an onion. You start peeling and there's a lot of layers. But here is again another opportunity where you can be invited on your capacity as researcher just to represent your work. So the point here on this two, on the expose policymakers to your research and on the democratic tools, is that you can engage with the policymakers as an expert. So you are nominate yourself and you enter these platforms as an expert. But also there's a lot of opportunities to expose policymakers to your research. So you come as a researcher to present a specific topic. And of course, don't underestimate social media. Policymakers actually read it. They may not react to it, but they do read it. And if you have a very important paper coming out, or if you have communication goals, so on in different projects, maybe you want to tag the relevant DG when you are doing that. So as simple as that. So you have, oh, this new paper came out from aWISH, and then we put at DG Santé. So, by the way, hint, hint. And then finally, get other stakeholders on board. So here the point is policymakers are surrounded by technical people and people that read a lot of research. So you should also, when thinking about engagement, thinking about this broader bubble around them. So we have, of course, civil society like us, like environmental NGOs, consumer NGOs, human rights NGOs, and so on, that you want 100% to engage and maybe just say, oh, I have a new research coming out and it's probably interesting for you. The same with trading associations, so farmers, industry bodies that are equivalent to us, but representing the industry and farmers, that you may want to alert them as well for your research. Media outlets, so the journalists in the Brussels bubble are very expert. They have a massive expertise on political science, but not so much on the topics. So if they know experts around the topics, they'll more likely call you and ask you for quotes and so on. So there's another way to increase your visibility. And finally, and this is probably where I can expand a little bit outside more of the European Commission, but also to the Council and the Parliament, all of these bodies have advisors, technical advisors around them. So these are also people that are worth engaging with and learning and having contact with if you want to also make sure that all these policymakers will take into account your research. And I'll stop there and I didn't go on purpose on the EFSA, because I will hand over to my amazing colleague Marta to give you a little bit more detail on the EFSA process.
Great. Thank you so much, Ines.
Do you want to share the screen, or do you want me to drive? What do you prefer?
Yeah, if you could just keep it that way, that would be great.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, thank you everybody for joining our webinar today. My name is Marta Klimczak and I will talk to you about the new EFSA stakeholder engagement process and call for evidence. We can go to the next slide. So EFSA, while we're talking about the bodies of the European Union, is the European Food Safety Authority, the body that provides independent scientific advice and communicates on emerging and existing risks associated with the food chain. And it also works on animal health and animal welfare through their dedicated panel. They work with all the animals that are used for food production and fish as well. Next slide, please. As EFSA states on their website, engagement with stakeholders is essential to their work, and it reflects their commitment to openness, transparency, and dialogue. They group their stakeholders in 7 different groups, as you can see on the slide, which include consumers, farmers, distributors, food industry, practitioners, and the 2 groups I assume are most relevant to us today, which are NGOs and academia. And both stakeholders are recruited from a pool that EFSA creates thanks to calls for expression of interest. Next slide, please. And to work with those stakeholders even better, EFSA created a new engagement approach, which was introduced during a stakeholders meeting in Brussels in November last year. So this new approach will involve all the animal welfare mandates received by EFSA after September of 2023, and it is based on early and regular involvement of stakeholders in the risks assessment before the scientific opinion is adopted by EFSA. Next slide, please. And here is a short overview of the steps included in this new engagement process. So I've already talked about the expression of interest and public meetings. And the next step is call for evidence, which we have some experience with already. We participated in the calls for evidence for the scientific opinion on the welfare of turkeys, beef cattle, animals raised for fur, and equidae. Also throughout the mandate, there are envisioned ad hoc technical hearings and targeted consultations, and the whole process will be finalized with a public webinar. Next slide, please. Call for evidence is a very important part of this new engagement process. EFSA is going to launch it after the stakeholders meeting, and the participants are invited to submit the information they deem are relevant for the scientific opinion based on the questions outlined by EFSA. And this call will be made publicly available, publicly announced, so the stakeholders will learn about it through newsletters, calls to action, alerts from EFSA. We can go to the next slide, please. And this input made by the stakeholders will be made publicly available, and later EFSA will assess whether it's suitable to be included in the scientific opinion. The call will be in public domain, so the interested parties can submit their evidence autonomously. There is no need for a centralized submission. And an important information for, I think, specifically NGOs is that the evidence can consist of grey literature, so reports, investigations, databases, case studies, guides to best practices, and master's thesis, for example. And here is the snapshot of the online tool. That's what it looks like. And please, let's go to the next slide. I just wanted to make a very short note about the technical aspect of this online tool. It allows only for one document per topic, so if stakeholders have more evidence to submit, they can do it either by saving multiple files to a zip folder or creating a spreadsheet or a Google or Word document like this snapshot I included below. To overcome this blocker, and it is also a good approach to respect copyright laws. Next slide, please. After the call for evidence is closed, there may be ad hoc technical hearings throughout the mandate. So the stakeholders who have already provided relevant information may be included in the meetings of EFSA working groups, which is a great opportunity to deliver further details about this evidence provided and defend its validity. Next slide, please. Another tool to engage with stakeholders is targeted consultations. If needed, EFSA will run them before the adoption of a scientific opinion. So if EFSA needs any additional input on specific parts of the draft, stakeholders who have already taken part in the previous steps may be consulted. And this input will again be made public, and this call for targeted consultations will be announced on the dedicated EFSA portal. Next slide, please. And the whole process is finalized after the scientific opinion is adopted. The public will be informed via webinar where the scientific opinion will be presented, and it is also a great opportunity for the stakeholders to learn how their input was considered, why or why not it was included in the final scientific opinion. Next slide, please. Yes, this is the end of the presentation. I hope you learned something, and I hope it was useful. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Marta and Ines. Now, I didn't yet see any questions come up in the chat, but we have 25 minutes to have some further discussion. So if somebody has a question or a point of discussion, please just raise your hand in Teams.
Maybe also to say, because we have more time, if there was a point that you would like us to go into more detail, I'm happy to go.
So I see Sarah. You
Yeah,
can
hello.
ask your question. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the nice presentation and a lot of information, which was quite beneficial and useful for us. Actually, I'm presenting my company, which is CLK, and we are this automation and robotic company, and we develop AI products for these animal welfare. And I didn't see any mention of these kind of technologies or innovation. How can we collaborate, or how can we make a difference as a in policy making and all? Because I think we talk about a lot of animal welfare, and I think you need these kind of tools or systems to analyze the health or the quality, or if the animal is handled properly, and that is what we provide. And how can we integrate ourselves into the system? How can we go through it? How can we help in policy making so that a slaughterhouse has to follow certain norms using the product that we build?
So there are several ways to do this, but I would say if it was me, the first thing I would do is look at the most recent legislative proposals on the table, because that's how you can make yourself more relevant. Because usually technology and data collection come as what we call a delegated act or implementing act. So what does this mean? Is that the Commission will propose kind of primary and secondary law, and then on this law you will read things such as, and then a further legislation needs to be developed to collect this data, or further, or to check this impact, or so this is where you get the hints of what the Commission is going to need next and what are they already writing, as we call the Delegated or Implementing Act, usually Implementing Act, Delegated Act. What is the Delegated Act is they produce this proposal of legislation, and then within this legislation you read things such as, and then the member state has to take this on, and this is the Implementing Act. So it means that the member state has the ownership to produce that. And that's also something that may be interesting for you, because then it means you can engage with the member states directly. But then you also read something like further research is needed on this, and then the Commission, after having this research, is supposed to produce a delegated act. It's called delegated because the member states are delegating power to the Commission to keep writing further legislation that doesn't need to consult Parliament or Council. So they have the power. It's delegated power to them. And this is where, for example, you read on the cats and dogs legislation that they are looking into interconnectivity of all the databases of the cats and dogs identification, the databases of the member states. So by reading that, it's a hint that probably the Commission is already thinking about it. So what you do is the department's thinking about it, you have a meeting with the department, say, look, we're doing this is how we work, and so on. And then you present and you create that relationship. But for that, you have to create a relationship directly with the Commission, because it's them writing this delegated act. If you see the legislation also says things such as the member states then should create, then you go directly to the member state to present it. And that you can do it either at national level or here in the Brussels level as well. But for that, I would probably go national. But you see what I mean? Like, technology usually comes from that. If you want to engage further up, what you look at is to think, okay, the Commission, for example, on animal welfare, has committed to do a revision of the animal welfare legislation. It's now kind of paused, but it will come probably, hopefully, in the next term. Then you look at it saying, okay, for this, they're going to need to monitor this and this and that. So maybe you want to engage at the higher level and say, introduce the company, say, look, we are looking into this. We think that it can be useful animal welfare because we collect this and this data. And this is more about ensuring that, for example, in the new proposal, they write something about monitoring animal welfare. So, but this is more kind of top level, not so much kind of already thinking about the tool and so on. So it's more kind of just making sure the door is there so you can open it for afterwards. So does that make sense, Sarah? Or yeah.
Yeah, I took some notes. Yeah, it gives me an idea. I know this is how it should be.
It's a lot.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
All right.
More questions? Not at the moment. I had a question, Marta, on the public consultations. So I didn't get it from the story, but is there a consultation related to animal welfare open now or coming soon? And on which topics?
Yes, there will be a consultation on fish welfare. I think trout.
Yeah.
We suppose it will be open in about a week or two.
Okay. So and do you know further ahead what will come open? Is there a list of upcoming consultations that is publicly available?
Yes, there is a list available on EFSA's website. So all the consultations and all the scientific opinions that have already been created are listed there, and the upcoming ones that EFSA received a mandate for are also listed there. Yeah, we can provide you a link after the webinar.
We should, and if we can give you already some of the what's coming next. So a lot of aquatics on the table now. So there's trout, salmon, sea bass, sea bream, eels, and carp. We also know at the moment there is fur and horses and beef and turkey being looked at, but that's already kind of, as Marta explained, past the public consultation, although they may come back to ask for specific topics. And then there will also be something on invertebrates, but this is kind of until 2030. So there is a lot, but we can share definitely the plan. And this is the type of thing that I was also trying to alert to, that knowing, for example, that the EFSA is going to look at droughts, what we did is we engaged, of course, with researchers 3 years ahead of it to say, look, EFSA is going to look at this. So are you doing any research on drought welfare, on eel welfare, or whatever? So set your deadline so the EFSA can pick up your research. So you can already look until 2030 to start thinking, okay, what's next? What's going to be relevant? What are the gaps? What are the needs?
Yeah. And maybe following on that, if you look back to the very first point that you mentioned, the project calls at European level, how does that cycle work? As in, how are the project call topics decided?
So there is no super transparent way, I think, to say. So this DG that decides on the research funds, they do a internal consultation with the different directorate general. So different departments say what's coming up, what's important for you. What do you think about this idea, and so on. And then there is an external distribution of funding and a call, and then there's also an internal distribution of call amongst the DGs, of money amongst the DGs. So ways to influence this is definitely with the DG that will raise the issue, like Sante, but also with the research one. And then there are several reports, like looking at what's coming next, the research agenda of the EU. All of that can give you hints of where it's going next. But what at a very top level can give you a first clue, like to get it fresh out of the bag, it's now the new parliament is going to be elected, and then they will have to elect a commission. And then this commission has to draw a strategy and have a work program, which should be with us around January next year. And this is your first hint of where the direction of things are going. Of course, it's going to be very top level, but then you can relate it to the area. For example, if the commission uses words like One Health or food security or food safety, you know that potentially the research will follow those words and will follow those topics. So that's kind of, what can give you the first hints of, as a research institute mainly, but what's coming next on the agenda for that. But for example, now open as well, you have EFSA that just opens a call for finding a method to measure temperatures on trucks. It's an open call, just opened this week, I think. And if you are an institute that is approved by EFSA, so on the list, you can apply to get that for that open call. So this is more, again, to opportunity to get grants. But that's a different department, I'll say.
I see that Kaya has a question.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is totally the right webinar for it, but I'm curious about. Sorry, my name is Kaya. I'm from Wakker Dier NGO in the Netherlands. I have a question to understand EFSA a little bit better, because recently the scientific opinions came out, and some of it was really wonderful, like a really beautiful overview, and I thought also really much quite progressive, like in terms of animal welfare. But then sometimes I was a bit, I think, surprised by some of the conclusions or recommendations that were made. For example, that ducks don't really, it's not a must that they need to have access to bathing water. And could you maybe, I'm not sure if this is, yeah, could you maybe explain like how these recommendations then come about? Like, is the research, is like the proof just not there? Is like the data just not strong enough? Or like, or is it maybe there are still some like other political dynamics that are not that visible? Yeah, is that, yeah, I would just be curious about that. Like, what's going on there?
Do you want me to take this on, Marta, or do you want? So it's a tricky question, but I will try as much as possible to. But it is a relevant one. So I think there are several things to answer to this. So the first one is that in terms of political forces around EFSA, EFSA has been working a lot, and we are part of the Stakeholders Bureau, and also we have an NGO on the management board and so on, to try as much as possible to become transparent. And they do also public consultations around that. So they asked kind of, is this still relevant? Our transparency procedures we can all, as individual researchers, if we want to engage at that level, to say kind of to the EFSA, I don't think this was transparent enough. You have to improve this. industry stakeholders have to be, whatever you want to say in that, but that's one kind of the higher top level engagement. Then on a more concrete level engagement, there are several reasons why sometimes EFSA concludes certain things, but mainly I would say that usually when there is a lack of strong research on a topic, that's when they usually refrain more from saying something. So I'll give an example of the dairy welfare opinion, the cow and calf time together. So there is kind of some evidence that shows that mother and calf should be together. And, you know, as an animal welfare expert, 100% there is evidence, but it's kind of isolated, national, very focal research. So what EFSA did is, we can't conclude that mother and calf can be together for, you know, as many weeks as we think they should, but we can say at least 24 hours because we can see that there is a trend of science going in that direction. They shouldn't ever conclude stuff based on economic viability because that's not the part of EFSA. EFSA should only base their opinions on science. So if the science is not strong enough, it may take, and probably I'm sure some of you on the call are kind of from the expert panels and so on. And that's my final point is it's very sometimes variable in species of recommendations, also based on the expert panels that are set together. And for example, in poultry was, I think, a very good expert opinions coming from EFSA. But sometimes in other topics where there's less research, it may be less. So that's why I'm saying, if you look at the map and if you see it's coming on salmon, for example, then if you know there are gaps in research, maybe it's time as researchers, as NGOs, to engage with the researchers to say, look, this is coming up. There are gaps on stocking density on salmon or enrichment on salmon. So if you want your research to be picked up by EFSA, you need to start working now, because in 2 years, they are going to start scanning for it and looking for it. And there is a gap. And if there is a gap, the conclusion of EFSA is always going to be there is not enough data, so we're not going to conclude. That's it, because they can't do it without. Yeah.
But I do find tricky that you say they can never base it on economic viability, but I do think that you can see that a lot of big research, like back in the day, has been done on economic viability, and then we have to draw conclusions on animal welfare, and I find it a bit tricky. Okay, but yeah.
But it shouldn't. In theory, it shouldn't. That's the
okay.
point. Mm-hmm.
That's good to hear. Thank you.
There was also a question in the chat from Lorenza. I don't know if you want to ask it yourself, Lorenza.
Hi, yes, thank you for the webinar. Yes, I just wanted to know a little bit better about this EU legislation in terms of delegated acts to the Commission, because I understood what you, Ines, said with respect to national member states, but with respect to the need to discuss all the acts with the other EU institutions, is there some case in which the Commission can go ahead without this discussion, or it's not like possible?
If it's a delegated act, it doesn't need a trilogue, so it can go ahead. But of course, it's going to have input by consultation stuff for member states. But there is no trilogue for it. So the Commission, because when they created the secondary legislation, the Parliament and the Council said yes, you can do this. So they delegate the act. So they trust the Commission to produce this. Of course, the Commission, in order to increase the chances of implementing the legislation and for the legislation to be adopted, is going to consult a lot with the member states, because they will not create something that then the member states go like, not using it, or it's not implementable. So they will do it, but not via this trialogue route.
But is it a matter of subjects or something different?
It's a matter of, for example, it usually more kind of, if there is no research now, like aquatics and transport, it may be that now this new legislation on transport says once there is more legislation, the Commission can write the rest, can add detail to this, but this is the basis, for example. Okay. So it can be a species or it can be a subject. It depends on the case.
Okay, thank you.
Answer you.
Something else from somebody? Maybe I have a question to the rest of the audience, because I saw that I think there's a lot of people from NGOs present here. in the webinar now. I was wondering also how you guys follow up science. For example, do you go to scientific conferences? Because we have the WAFL conference coming up end of August. Several of the organizers are here as well in the webinar. So I'm wondering is that a way to interact also between scientists and NGOs? Nobody? Maybe raise your hand if you're coming to the conference.
Yes, we might.
Yeah. Good.
We
Okay.
are presenting at the EAP, so the bigger one. Eurogroup was invited for one of the plenary sessions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Laura's like, yay! Thank you, Laura. But Elena is coming, so our senior vet expert. Unfortunately, I can't. But yes, I think if I may say, one of the barriers sometimes for NGOs, it's time, but also the fee. We have very tight budgets, and fees sometimes may be a challenge. Even if it's a couple of hundreds, it's especially for smaller NGOs, it's a challenge, I would say. But
yep.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks everybody for being here. Thanks for sharing all your knowledge, Ines and Marta. And if any of you guys want to know more about the aWISH project, just contact us through the website, for example. There's a contact form, and then you come into the mailbox of the ILVO team. Or you can contact Eurogroup for Animals for further questions if you have them. And hope to maybe see you in one of our next webinars. If there's somebody that has an idea for a next webinar topic and presenter, you can also contact us. We'd be happy to have some inputs. So thank you very much, everybody, and enjoy your afternoon.